There comes a moment in a person's life when nothing appears to be completely wrong, and yet nothing feels completely right anymore. You wake up, continue with the same routines, speak to the same people, and move through the same familiar world, but somewhere deep inside, something has shifted. You cannot always explain it. You may not even have the words for it. You simply begin to feel that the person who once accepted certain things without question is no longer the same person standing inside you. And this is where many people become afraid. They assume that because their old interests no longer excite them, something must be wrong. Because certain relationships begin to feel different, they think they are becoming cold. Because old ambitions lose their power, they believe they are failing. But sometimes, what feels like confusion is actually the first evidence of transformation. The old version of you is quietly losing its power, not because it was worthless, not because everything you once believed was false, but because a human being cannot remain psychologically unchanged forever. There is a part of you that is always moving toward greater wholeness, and when the identity you have built begins to become too small for the person you are becoming, the psyche begins to create discomfort. This discomfort may appear in unexpected ways. You may suddenly question goals you once chased for years. You may realize that some of your desires were never truly yours. They belong to your family, your culture, your environment, or to the image of success you were taught to admire. You may discover that you were not pursuing happiness at all, but approval. You were not choosing a life. You were trying to become acceptable within someone else's expectations. And eventually, something inside you begins to resist. At first, this resistance can feel like exhaustion. Then it may become restlessness. You may find yourself needing more silence than before. You may become less interested in explaining yourself. You may begin to notice how often you have betrayed your own feelings just to keep peace with others. These realizations can be uncomfortable because the personality you created to survive is not always the personality that can lead you into your future. This is the beginning of individuation, the gradual process of becoming more fully yourself. It does not mean becoming selfish. It does not mean rejecting everyone around you. It means beginning to distinguish between the voice of your authentic self and the voices you have carried from other people. It means asking a difficult question. If I were no longer trying to be who everyone expected me to be, who would I actually become? The answer rarely arrives all at once. Instead, it begins through small moments. A conversation that suddenly feels empty. A familiar habit that no longer brings comfort. A dream that stays in your mind long after you wake. A sudden emotional reaction that makes you wonder what lies beneath it. These are often the quiet languages of the unconscious. The deeper parts of your mind may be showing you that something within you is changing before your circumstances have had time to reveal it. And this is why the transition can feel so lonely. You are still physically present in the same life, but psychologically, you have begun to leave an old one. You may still live in the same place, work the same job, and interact with the same people. Yet your inner relationship with these things has changed. The world has not moved, but your perception of it has. That is the beginning of every meaningful transformation. Before the outer life changes, the inner image of who you are must change first. And when the old self can no longer control your future, the new self begins to emerge. And once the old version of you begins to lose its power, something else begins to happen. The parts of your inner world that you have avoided for years may begin asking to be seen. This is often where the transformation becomes uncomfortable, because the unconscious does not always speak in a language that feels convenient. It may speak through a recurring emotion, a disturbing dream, an unexpected memory, or a reaction that seems much stronger than the situation deserves. You may find yourself becoming unusually angry over something small, deeply affected by a simple conversation, or suddenly remembering something you thought you had completely forgotten. And you may wonder, why is this happening to me now? Perhaps because you are finally becoming quiet enough to hear what was always there. Most people spend much of their lives trying to maintain a particular image of themselves. They want to be strong, kind, successful, calm, intelligent, independent, or in control. There is nothing wrong with these qualities. But whenever we build an identity around only the parts of ourselves we are willing to accept, the rejected parts do not simply disappear. They move into the shadows. The shadow is not necessarily evil. It is simply the part of your personality that your conscious identity has refused to recognize. The anger you were taught was unacceptable. The vulnerability you learned to hide. The ambition you felt guilty for having. The fear you pretended did not exist. Even the strength you were afraid to express. And when life begins to change you from within, these hidden parts may begin to rise. This can feel like losing control, but sometimes it is actually the beginning of becoming more conscious. You begin to notice patterns that previously controlled you without your awareness. You recognize why certain people trigger you so deeply. You begin to see why you repeatedly choose situations that hurt you. You realize that what you strongly dislike in others may sometimes touch something within yourself that you have not yet understood. This is not an invitation to blame yourself. It is an invitation to become honest, because what remains unconscious often continues to influence your life. What you refuse to see may quietly make your decisions for you. But the moment you are willing to look at your inner world without immediately judging it, something changes. You no longer have to be controlled by every emotion simply because it appears. You can observe it. You can ask where it came from. You can listen to what it is trying to reveal. This is where real inner transformation begins. Perhaps you are discovering that your constant need to please others was not kindness, but fear of rejection. Perhaps your desire to control everything was not strength, but a response to uncertainty. Perhaps your emotional distance was not independence, but protection from being hurt again. These realizations can be painful, because they challenge the story you have told yourself about who you are. But they also give you freedom. The unconscious often brings hidden material to the surface when you are finally strong enough to face it. Not because it wants to punish you, but because the psyche naturally moves toward wholeness. A person cannot become complete by loving only the parts of themselves that are easy to admire. You must eventually meet the parts that you abandoned. And when you do, you may discover that the very qualities you feared were weaknesses contain forgotten energy. Your anger may reveal a boundary you never learned to protect. Your sadness may reveal what truly matters to you. Your fear may point toward the place where growth is waiting. The inner change happening within you may therefore feel like confusion at first. But beneath that confusion, something deeper is taking place. The unconscious is bringing you closer to the truth of yourself. And once you begin seeing what was hidden, you can no longer return completely to the person you were before. What you are finally willing to face can no longer control you from the darkness. And as you begin to see the hidden parts of yourself more clearly, another quiet change begins to appear in your daily life. You start losing interest in the things that once controlled you. At first, this may confuse you. You may notice that the approval you once desperately needed no longer gives you the same satisfaction. You may stop feeling the need to explain every decision. You may become less interested in proving that you are right, successful, desirable, or worthy. The arguments that once consumed your entire day may suddenly feel strangely small, and you may wonder what has happened to you. Perhaps nothing has been lost. Perhaps something within you has finally become stronger than the need to be constantly validated by the outside world. For much of life, people are unconsciously guided by the question, how will this make me look? They choose relationships, careers, opinions, and even dreams according to the reactions they expect from others. They learn to measure themselves through external mirrors. If people admire them, they feel valuable. If people reject them, they feel diminished. But eventually, something begins to shift. The inner world becomes more important than the image being presented to the outer world. You begin to ask different questions. Not, will they approve of me? But, is this true for me? Not, will this make me look successful? But, does this actually give my life meaning? Not, how can I keep everyone happy? But, what am I sacrificing within myself to maintain this peace? These questions can change everything. Because the moment you begin to live from a deeper center, many things that once seemed essential begin to lose their power. You may no longer feel the same attraction toward endless competition. You may become tired of conversations that contain no honesty. You may find that certain environments drain you in ways you never noticed before. This does not mean you have become better than anyone else. It means you are becoming more aware of what is happening inside you. There is a difference between rejecting the world and no longer allowing the world to define your worth. There is a difference between becoming isolated and discovering that you need solitude to hear your own thoughts. There is a difference between losing ambition and realizing that some of your ambitions were inherited from people who never understood your true nature. The deeper self does not always shout. Sometimes it simply removes your appetite for what no longer belongs to you, and this can make the transition feel strangely empty. You may find yourself between identities. The old sources of excitement no longer satisfy you, but the new direction has not yet become clear. You may feel as though you are standing in a room you have outgrown, surrounded by familiar objects that no longer feel like home. This is a delicate stage of transformation. Many people return to the old life simply because the unknown feels uncomfortable. They reconnect with old patterns, old distractions, and old versions of themselves because at least those things are familiar. But familiarity is not always truth. Sometimes the discomfort you feel is simply the evidence that you are no longer able to live unconsciously. The process of becoming yourself requires a certain separation from the expectations that shaped you, not a separation from love, not a separation from compassion, but a separation from the false belief that you must abandon yourself to be accepted. And slowly, you begin to understand that peace does not always come from getting everything you want. Sometimes peace comes from no longer wanting what once kept you trapped. This is how the inner transformation becomes visible. You stop chasing every opportunity. You stop responding to every provocation. You stop begging people to recognize your value. You stop trying to force doors that were never meant to open. And in that quiet release, something powerful happens. Your energy begins returning to you. What once controlled you no longer has the same authority over your mind. You are not becoming someone new. You are becoming less controlled by everything that was never truly you. And when you stop allowing the outside world to control every decision you make, something else begins to change. You start noticing things you once overlooked. A conversation happens at exactly the moment you have been struggling with a certain question. A sentence in a book suddenly seems to describe the very conflict you have been carrying inside. You hear a particular idea from two completely different people within the same week. You encounter a symbol, a place, or a memory that seems to return repeatedly when you are standing at an important crossroads. At first, you may dismiss these moments as coincidence. And perhaps, in the ordinary sense, they are. But there are moments when coincidence becomes psychologically meaningful. Not because every event is a supernatural message designed specifically for you, but because your inner world has begun to change the way you perceive reality. This is where the idea of synchronicity becomes important. When something within you changes, your attention changes with it. You begin to notice patterns that were always present, but previously invisible to your consciousness. The world has not necessarily started speaking more loudly. You have simply become quiet enough to hear certain things. Think of a person who has just begun thinking seriously about a particular question. Suddenly, that question appears everywhere. In a conversation, in a song, in a book, in a passing remark from a stranger. It may seem as if the entire world has suddenly organized itself around one theme. But perhaps the world has not changed. Perhaps you have. Your mind has become sensitive to something that was previously outside your awareness. This does not mean you should turn every number, every coincidence, or every unexpected event into a prediction. That would be another form of unconsciousness. The deeper meaning of synchronicity is not blind superstition. It is the recognition that your inner life and your experience of the outer world can sometimes meet in ways that feel deeply significant. A symbol may appear at the right moment because it touches something already developing within you. A dream may repeat a particular image because some part of your psyche is trying to draw your attention toward a conflict you have avoided. A recurring theme in your life may continue appearing until you finally understand what it is asking you to see. The important question is not always, what does this event mean for my future? A deeper question is, why does this event affect me so deeply right now? That question brings the power back to your own consciousness. Perhaps you keep encountering images of doors, roads, oceans, mountains, or darkness. These symbols may have different meanings for different people, but their significance often depends on what they awaken within you. A door may represent possibility. A road may represent movement. Water may suggest the emotional depths of the unconscious. A mountain may reflect the struggle towards something greater. The symbol itself is not a fixed answer. It is an invitation to look inward. And as your inner transformation continues, These moments of recognition may become more frequent, not because the universe has suddenly begun sending you dramatic signs, but because you are becoming more conscious of the relationship between your inner world and the world you experience. This is why a simple sentence can suddenly change your perspective. Why a stranger's words can stay with you for days. Why an old memory can return at the precise moment you are finally ready to understand it differently. Something within you is reorganizing. And when the inner world begins to reorganize, your perception follows. You begin to see that your life is not shaped only by what happens to you. It is also shaped by what you are capable of noticing, understanding, and giving meaning to. The same world can be experienced by two people in completely different ways because they are not seeing from the same inner reality. So, if you have recently begun noticing meaningful patterns, recurring themes, or unexpected connections, do not immediately rush to label them as miracles or ignore them as meaningless coincidences. Pause, ask what they awaken within you, because sometimes the most important sign is not what appears in the world around you. It is the new consciousness within you that finally allows you to see it. And once you begin to notice the deeper patterns within yourself, you may enter one of the most confusing stages of transformation. You no longer feel completely connected to the person you used to be, but you have not yet become fully comfortable with the person you are becoming. This is the space between identities, and for many people, it feels like failure. You may wake up one morning and realize that the goals you once pursued no longer carry the same meaning. The relationships you once depended on may begin to feel different. The future you imagined may no longer look like the future you want. Yet, when you try to imagine something new, the picture remains unclear. You know what you are leaving, but you do not yet know where you are going. This is where many people become frightened and try to return to the past. They choose the familiar pain over the unfamiliar possibility. They return to old habits, old distractions, and old versions of themselves because uncertainty feels unbearable. But there is a difference between being lost and being in transition. When you are lost, you may have no sense of direction. When you are in transition, the old direction has stopped making sense. And these two experiences can feel almost identical from the inside. The strange emptiness you feel may not mean that your life has lost its purpose. It may mean that an old purpose is dissolving before a deeper one has had time to emerge. This is why transformation often feels like confusion before it feels like clarity. A seed does not look like a tree while it is becoming one. There is a period in which the old form is no longer visible, but the new form has not yet appeared. Something similar can happen within the human personality. The identity that once protected you may begin to loosen. The beliefs that once gave you certainty may be questioned. The roles you played for others may begin to feel too restrictive. And for a while, you may feel as though you are nobody. But perhaps you are not becoming nobody. Perhaps you are becoming less dependent on a false identity. The psyche often moves through a symbolic death before a new form of life can emerge. The person you had to become in order to survive one chapter may not be the person capable of entering the next. This does not mean you must hate your past self. That version of you carried you through experiences you may never fully understand. Honor that person. But do not confuse gratitude with permanent loyalty to an identity you have already outgrown. There may be days when you feel deeply uncertain. You may question your choices. You may wonder whether you are making a mistake by changing. You may look at other people and feel that they are moving forward while you are standing still. But inner transformation rarely follows a visible timetable. Some of the most important changes in a person's life happen during periods when nothing appears to be happening at all. You are learning what you no longer want. You are discovering what no longer feels true. You are becoming aware of the patterns that cannot accompany you into the future. That awareness itself is progress. You do not need to know every step before taking the next honest one. You do not need a complete map to begin walking in a direction that feels more authentic. Sometimes clarity does not come before movement. Sometimes clarity is created by movement. So if you are currently in a season where the old life feels too small, but the new life remains uncertain, do not rush to force an answer. Allow the uncertainty to teach you. There is a wisdom in the space between endings and beginnings. And when the new self is finally ready to emerge, you will understand why the old one had to become silent first. You are not lost. You are becoming someone your old life could no longer contain. And eventually, the inner change that no one else could see begins to reveal itself through the way you live. You do not suddenly wake up as a completely different person. There is no single morning when every question disappears and every answer becomes clear. Real transformation is usually quieter than that. It begins with the choices you make when no one is watching. You begin to respond differently to situations that once controlled you. You pause before reacting. You recognize the old pattern before repeating it. You notice the familiar temptation to return to the person you used to be, but something within you no longer allows you to remain there comfortably. This is when the inner transformation begins creating an outer life that reflects it. You may begin setting boundaries where you once remained silent. You may walk away from conversations that constantly diminish you. You may stop chasing people who only value you when you are useful to them. You may choose a path that does not make sense to everyone else, but finally makes sense to you. And perhaps the most important change is this. You stop needing your life to look meaningful to other people. The deeper self does not always choose what is most impressive. It chooses what is most true. This is why your external life may begin changing after your inner identity has already changed. Your decisions are no longer coming from the same fears. Your relationships are no longer being chosen from the same wounds. Your goals are no longer being created entirely from comparison. The outer world begins to respond because you are no longer participating in it from the same inner position. You may notice that certain people naturally move away. Certain opportunities no longer attract you. Certain environments become impossible to tolerate. At first, this can feel like loss, but not every loss is a punishment. Some losses are the natural result of no longer being the person who needed what you have outgrown. This is one of the deepest truths of psychological transformation. When your relationship with yourself changes, your relationship with everything else must eventually change as well. The person who once accepted disrespect may begin to demand honesty. The person who once feared solitude may begin to discover peace in their own company. The person who once believed they had to be chosen may finally realize that they are capable of choosing themselves. And this is where individuation becomes more than an idea. It becomes a way of living. You begin to integrate the parts of yourself you once rejected. You understand your shadow instead of allowing it to control you unconsciously. You listen to the deeper messages of your inner world without becoming trapped in superstition or fear. You recognize patterns, but you also take responsibility for the meaning you give them. You become more whole, not perfect, whole. There will still be fear. There will still be uncertainty. There will still be days when the old patterns return and ask whether you truly have changed. But transformation does not mean you never struggle again. It means you are no longer unconscious inside the struggle. You can see yourself more clearly, and once you can see yourself, you gain the possibility of choosing differently. This is how the invisible becomes visible. First, something changes in the way you think. Then, something changes in the way you feel. Then, something changes in the way you choose. And eventually, the life around you begins to reflect the person you have been becoming in silence. So, if your life currently feels uncertain, if old things are losing their power, if hidden emotions are rising, if familiar goals no longer satisfy you, and if you feel suspended between who you were and who you are becoming, do not assume that nothing is happening. Something may already be changing, not outside you, within you. And sometimes, the greatest changes in your life begin long before there is any visible evidence that your life is about to change. Your outer world is only beginning to catch up with the transformation that has already begun within you.